from a psychological perspective, I'm 100% sure that Karen did not do this on purpose. 100%. From the first moment that we get any information about the way her and John were arguing before, from the time of the Aruba trip, all the way up and through every text message with Brian Higgins, every interview she's ever given, every account of the crime, the scene before and after John's death, has been consistent behavior from Karen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here podcast, a call-in show where we are currently featuring the Karen Read murder trial. My name is Samantha Benigno. I am your host. I am a behavioral scientist, a psychotherapist, and a longtime true crime fan who just so happened to become totally obsessed with the Karen Read case a little under a year or so ago. And after following day in and day out through the last trial, really wanted to make sure that I had an outlet to talk about this through the next. So I should also mention that my obsession with Karen Read, in part, is because I was raised in Massachusetts, though I have lived in New York City for a very long time. And that is where I went to middle school and high school. So I think if you are somebody who's from Massachusetts, this case is pretty familiar. We all have towny bars like the Waterfall or C.F. McCarthy's. We all have families with longstanding ties in our communities like the Alberts. And so this case is very personal. And I guess in some way I see that I could have been Karen Read just as easily as she was, right? So it is a very personal case, and there is just no question, no matter which side of this thing you are on, that there's some questionable practices happening here on the part of the law enforcement and the Commonwealth at large, right? So it's crazy, the personal ties that we will eventually uncover and discuss between all of the major players in this case who are not Karen Read. So whether you believe in the defense cover-up theory or not, you just cannot deny that you would not want to be on the other end of this group of people. You would not want to be the target of their full-on assault of you, because there are some unbelievably questionable things happening. Now, I am not an attorney. As I said, am a behavioral scientist. I have master's degrees in psychology. I am 5 years through my PhD program in clinical psychology. I am a career psychotherapist. So my brain just immediately tries to figure out who are the players in this case. Are they honest? Do they have integrity? Should we believe them? And so I think you're going to get a very different look from me than you might from the legal minds that are doing a lot of analysis on this case, because that's just not the way that my brain works. But I want to make sure that we give everybody a somewhat fair shot, or at least that it's clear from my view why I feel the way I feel, because there is something called confirmation bias, where of course I want to believe everything horrible about the other side, regardless of which side I'm on. And I am an intelligent person who does question just about everything I hear, but I'm not going to just stop there. I'm going to dig to try to find answers. And so hopefully I can bestow some of that onto you as we go through this case together. Now, I also firmly believe that there's going to be a lot of newcomers to this case because, you know, the ID channel is about to run a big feature on this story, and the case is under a month away now, the trial itself. So we are going to be full throttle here in no time. And even though there's a huge following already, my guess is a whole new audience is going to be becoming familiar with this case. And if I were you, I can't even imagine what it would be like to try to get caught up now, because frankly, there are 3 years worth of daily events that have transpired in this case. So much information to sort through, 4 months of jury trial, witnesses, day in, day out. So there's just an incredible of information already out there. And my thought was, if I were new to this, I would really love it if somebody could just introduce me to the straight up most important bits of information that I need to know in order to understand and be caught up to even have a sense of what the hell is going on here. So I am going to do that for you. Over the next couple of shows, we're going to break down just the most key bits of information today, starting with the 24 hours around the events that surround John O'Keefe's passing. Now, I also want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the main players in this case, starting with John O'Keefe himself, because I think he especially can get lost in all of this. And in other trials, it doesn't really matter. It's almost like just stick with the facts because the facts are what matter. But in this case, that's just not true. We have this cast of characters who are pivotal because it's their testimony that we are left with. We don't have eyes, or at least the Commonwealth is claiming to not have as much video as we now know that they do, right? Because video clips continue to just show up even 3 years later and after an entire trial has taken place. But having said that, we don't have a play-by-play on video camera of exactly what took place in the hour or so that matters most in this case. And so because of that, we are left to try to assess the credibility of these people, including Karen Read. So we're going to talk a lot about who these people are and whether or not we should believe anything that they say. And then we're also going to discuss the idea of a cover-up, because yes, that's what the defense is claiming, and that's not entirely false, but it's not as though every single police officer or district attorney involved in this case, it's not as though they all got together, sat in a room and said, okay, we're going to frame this woman. It's more that, yes, a small group of people likely did do that, who we are going to talk about and name directly. But the rest of it sort of grew in large part because way before there was ever a Karen Read, these people in general have been caught up in other suspicious behaviors, right? So it's not outside of the realm of possibility that these people would try to pin it on the girl, right? She is the outsider. And if you are familiar with communities like this, particularly in Massachusetts, they are very protective of each other. They are very small town. They are very protective and defensive of each other. And so the more outside attention that is on this case, the more you see these people kind of pushing back, right? The more they're doubling down on protecting each other. And that's a lot of what we're seeing even now from Judge Beverly Cannoni, who is the judge in this case, and who many of us believe, or at least have been convinced after the last year of engaging with her, of dealing with her, that she is absolutely not objective, to say the least. And so that's not paranoia. That comes from the decisions that she's made throughout, including the most recent one, which we will get to eventually, I promise. And that's the thing right now, because we're right about to start this next trial, there's a ton of motions going back and forth between both the Commonwealth and the defense. And there's just so much of an information to sort through. We also have the situation with Turtle Boy, who Aidan Carney, who is a journalist, a local journalist or blogger, whatever you want to call him, who is the one who exposed or largely exposed the very questionable behavior on the part of the police and the Commonwealth in general. And so he too is now in legal trouble because these people have come after him because, let's be honest, they don't like having their feet held to the fire or being crucified on social media because he's out there with a megaphone, literally and figuratively, screaming about the corruption. So he too is now a co-occurring theme or situation that you're going to hear brought up in this case. So if you hear a reference to Turtle Boy, that is who he is, and he's important. You can also check him out on YouTube. He's amazing. He's hilarious. He calls himself a satirist because he's funny. And frankly, he is funny. And I will say thank God for Turtle Boy, because he has really helped us to understand who these people are. If nothing else, he has exposed legitimate corruption, I guess, on the part of this group of police officers. And you may also hear about Sandra Birchmore, who is another important case. She came long before Karen Reed, but you're going to hear her name brought up because that is a case that finally, thanks to podcasts and various true crime outfits that were featuring her story, she is a woman who was murdered, but the police officers, many of whom are the same who overlap with the Karen Reed case, were ruled the death a suicide. And that has now since come under fire by the feds. So finally, after years, we're starting to see that there's some justice there in the Sandra Birchmore case. But that is another name who you may hear brought up that is loosely, very, very loosely related to the Karen Reed case. Again, only because there's some overlap in who the police officers are that are involved in both. So again, this is not a corruption-free group of cops. It's just not. And when you start to hear their names brought up repeatedly in both cases, you realize, man, this is real, right? These cops are, some of them are pretty dirty cops, it seems, or at least are willing to go to any length to, number one, protect each other, though not John O'Keefe, apparently, and number two, to do justice in whatever way they see fit, right? So you're going to see also, just focusing on the Karen Reed case, the kind of shoddy investigation that was done here. And by any measure, and you don't have to take my word for it, you can hear there's countless former feds, former cops, detectives who you can hear that are out there on social media, on YouTube, ranting and raving about this investigation and how unbelievably shoddy it was. So, a lot of just objectively factual bits of information point to a group of cops who are not on the up and up, right? So that's the background. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they are guilty of what the defense is claiming in this case, but it's something that you need to know right up front about why the defense is claiming that, right? And it all matters because it goes specifically to, what happened here. Okay, now having said that, I want to put all of that to the side and just focus today on what actually happened solely and specifically in the time surrounding John O'Keefe's death. Now, remember, this is a call-in show, so if you want to know more about how you can call and talk to me, go ahead and check out the show notes. Lots of information in there. So I want to begin today just by talking about Boston police officer, John O'Keefe. By every standard, John O'Keefe, also who went by Johnny or JJ, seemed like a really good guy. He was in his 40s when he passed. He was born in 1975. Actually, 7 days after me. I was born on December 1st. He was born on December 8th, but a few years before me. So he was a Sagittarius, just like me, whatever that means. Very well educated, has his bachelor's degree from Northeastern, which is an awesome Boston college, and went on to get a master's degree from UMass. His master's degree was in criminal justice. He also took on the responsibility of his niece and nephew who were orphaned horribly after first, I think, his sister fell ill, and then her husband tragically passed soon thereafter. So he just stepped up and took that responsibility on as a single man. Unbelievable. What an incredible thing to do, right? What does that say about you if you're the kind of person that would be willing to do that? Was with the Boston police force for 16 years. So just a loyal guy, seems like an incredibly good guy. Him and Karen began dating 2 years earlier during COVID. Apparently, they had dated when they were young, like early 20s, and then reconnected, of course, I believe on Facebook. There's that Facebook again, right? Goddamn Facebook. So met up again, started dating, and I guess we're hot and heavy pretty soon thereafter. But everybody knows, it's very well reported, that this was a rocky relationship. There was a lot of drinking that went on. And I will say on the front end, no matter what you think about any of these people, they drank a lot. They all drank a lot. Now, if you paid any attention to what the juror who was a part of the deliberations through the last trial, what he was saying about why they voted the way they did, it turned out that the drinking was a huge part of all of their thinking. So it has to be also a big part of our thinking as we approach this next trial. And I will also say that I will argue up and down that none of this happens without the kind of excessive drinking that's taking place here, not just by Karen, but by everybody, which again, not a surprise. If you grew up in Massachusetts in any of these towns, certainly outside of Boston, you know that these towny places, people drink. People drink a lot, right? Routine activity. I was drinking a lot with people just like Brian Albert when I was 15 years old, and they were 6 and 7 years older than me, right? So there's a lot of drinking that takes place in these communities. We all understand that. We all know that. And yeah, what happens when everybody's drinking a lot? Shit hits the fan. That's what happens. So there's no question that you cannot take the amount of alcohol consumed in this case out of this case. It's a huge part of all of this. It can be easily overlooked. Our brain can just go, yeah, drinking. But the amount of alcohol that all of these people consume that night, I think it's critical that you keep that in mind. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you first what the Commonwealth is alleging happened here. So you're going to hear it right from the horse's mouth. I'm going to show you a clip from closing arguments in this case from the Commonwealth, from Adam Lawley through the first trial, who is consequently not the lead attorney anymore, which is a story for another day. But you're going to hear from him. He's going to go through what they're alleging the timeline is so that you can see for yourself how the Commonwealth is presenting the case here and the charges against Karen, which I think if you have a psychology mind at all, or even eyes to see, you're going to realize there's some very questionable assertions in there, things that just do not add up at all. Just that part, right? Just what they're alleging and how they're sort of spinning Karen Reed and her actions in that time surrounding John's passing does not make at all sense. So whether you think she did it or not, the way that they're framing whether she did it or not is asinine. And even the jurors who we've since heard from on the first trial agreed that their assessment of the situation was not correct. Okay. So it's going to be really interesting, by the way, to see how this next trial plays out and how the two sides approach it differently, given what we know from the first trial. I cannot wait to see that. At the very least, this whole case is just fascinating. And if you're a true crime fan, like I have been for decades, you're going to love this, because it's a trip. It's a real mystery. And it's one that there's just so much information to sort through to try to solve. Okay, so we're going to start with the Commonwealth's version of events. And I'm doing this for a reason. I want you to maybe even be biased against Karen Reed so that we can not go into this the other way around. I want you to even start out thinking, geez, maybe she did do it because this makes sense. And then we can go ahead and debunk why it doesn't make sense, particularly from a psychological point of view. So I'm going to start with showing you, courtesy of Court TV, a segment of Adam Lawley's closing argument. And I'll stop it at various points so that we can talk about what it is that we hear him saying. Okay, so I want to set this up properly so that it's super clear why I'm about to say what I'm about to say. So, in psychology, we have jargon, we have these words that we throw around, like, for example, histrionic, which really just means that somebody displays emotion, maybe is overly emotional. We might think about them as dramatic, like a drama queen, somebody who just like emotes in a big way, right? So now there's a difference between using it in that way, saying, oh, someone's histrionic in that they're really emotional, versus saying someone has a histrionic personality disorder. So I'm going to say, I'm going out on a limb here and saying that what we've seen of Karen Reed, at least to this point, right, up until when we go back in this timeline that we're about to look at, and we look at everything we've come to learn about Karen and John and their relationship, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, we know that she's displaying a lot of histrionics, a lot of big emotional displays. And if you add alcohol to that, you start to see what looks like someone behaving in, a lot of theatrics. Okay. So that's what I mean when I use the word histrionic. But we also see a person with a ton of anxiety. And that tracks, knowing that she has this stomach issue, other things that we've seen from her on some of her, the interviews that we've seen on different news stations, different shows. She's an anxious person, more of an anxious type of person. And when anxious people get into relationships, it comes out oftentimes as the person who chases, right? So if you've ever been in a relationship with somebody who's anxious, they're the one that, like, when you're in an argument, they will not let it go until you've resolved it. Like they'll just keep coming at you. And if you're more avoidant, maybe like I might be, you're the one that wants some time away and keeps saying, no, I don't want to talk right now. I need some time, but they just keep coming at you, right? So in this case, and we're going to see in these exchanges and these text exchanges between Karen and John, that's what we have going on here. That's what people with an anxious attachment style do. So what is an attachment style? Well, an attachment style refers to the way that we are in our close relationships. They could be love relationships. Often we are talking about love relationships, but an attachment style develops within the first 2 years of life as a result of how our relationship is with our early caregivers, i.e., mom, almost always mom. So, depending on the way that our brain forms as a result of how the people around us interact with us, creates a general way of engaging with other human beings. And I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty. It has a lot to do with cortisol levels and predictability, and whether our caregivers are consistent with the way they engage us, whatever. Most people in today's day and age have some type of insecure attachment. So there are a number of different types of insecure attachments, and one of them is an anxious attachment. And that is very clearly what we have here. Now, John, although we can't say this for sure, based on the way he's responding to her, appears to have an avoidant attachment style. And what that means is when he gets anxious, he likes to run. He likes to just turn away, not look at it, ignore it. And this is how two people with this kind of attachment situation, one with an anxious attachment and the other with an avoidant attachment, this is how they get stuck in these dances where the anxious person is always chasing the avoidant person. And that really leaves the avoidant person with a little more power because they're the one that kind of has the driver's seat, right? They're the one that just simply by default, because they don't like to deal with feelings or they don't like to be uncomfortable, tend to try to put things out of their mind, not deal with things. And we definitely get the sense that John was more of that kind, certainly in comparison to Karen, who very clearly and very obviously is anxious, right? So I just want to preface what we're about to hear from that angle and say that when we see somebody behaving with histrionics and when we see somebody with an anxious attachment, it's all about getting attention. Like attention is the currency. They're not violent. They're not trying to hurt that person physically. They're trying to get their attention. So in a way, it's like the opposite. It's like using theatrics. It's like using, emotion really to try to get somebody to react, and so that they'll come towards you, so that they'll pay attention to you. And you get the sense here that that is exactly what's going on. So I just want to preface what we're about to see in terms of the timeline with this kind of understanding about, based on everything else that we've seen and heard from this woman, that is what appears to be true about her.
January 28th, 2022, 9:49 in the morning, Karen and John begin fighting over text messages. 2:25 p.m. in the afternoon, the defendant texts Mr. O'Keefe, "Tell me if you are interested in someone else. Can't think of any other reason you've been like this." John texts back, "Nope."
We know that since the incident on New Year's Eve where she thought she saw him hugging or kissing on another woman, which turned out not to be the case, she has been accusing him of being with other women. Now, you can imagine Karen's emotional. She's impulsive. That's what we know about her already. She has this anxious attachment. And if she feels that her boyfriend is pulling away from her, she probably is going to start to think, why is he pulling away? Maybe he's seeing somebody else. That is also what we find out because in Karen's text messaging with Brian Higgins, which we will learn more about in a bit, where she is kind of baiting Higgins into this flirty interaction, she mentions that things with John are not great and that she might be interested in Higgins, right? That things are not good. And Higgins is sort of saying to her, I don't want to get in the middle of this. Like, are you guys over or not? And in psychology, when people are accusing you, if your partner's accusing you of cheating, oftentimes it's an indication that they're thinking about it, that they have a wandering eye, because humans generally assume that other people think in a similar way to how we do. So if Karen's talking to some other guy, it stands to reason she might think that John is too.
2:25, Mr. O'Keefe texts the defendant, "Things haven't been great between us for a while. Ever consider that?" 2:32 p.m. John texts the defendant, "Sick of always arguing and fighting. It's been weekly for several months now." He then texts the defendant, "OMG, stop calling." This is during the time frame that Trooper Garino was talking about, with 18 phone calls, most of which were rejected, some of which were missed, and a couple of which were answered over the course of this afternoon, as she's continuing to needle and try to engage him in a fight that he doesn't want to have.
So that was 18 phone calls during this very brief period of time when they are texting back and forth about the state of their relationship. 18.
2:33 p.m. The defendant texts John, "So you're not into this anymore." 2:34 p.m. John texts the defendant, "I am not answering. Stop calling." The defendant then texts John, "Then stop starting with me." 2:38 p.m. The defendant texts John, "I'm going to grab a drink in a bit." 2:38 in the afternoon. Around 3 p.m. is the testimony you heard from Aaron O'Keefe, in regard to the defendant texting her asking if she can go out without her husband, Paul.
Just so you understand, Erin O'Keefe is John's brother's wife. So Paul O'Keefe is John's brother. And if you watched any of the trial, or if you watch the second trial, he'll be there every day. I think he was there just about every day, prominently featured, staring across from the jury in Bev's very small courtroom.
This is also the point in which the defendant says to Ms. O'Keefe, "Wish I didn't speak to another O'Keefe after 2004. 7:30 p.m., you have Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Camerano arriving at C.F. McCarthy's, with the defendant arriving at 8:51.
And in just a little bit, we'll take a look at the video of that point in time when Karen arrives to C.F. McCarthy's to greets John, and where we see them begin their night together. And then once they leave there, go on to the waterfall. Now, this is early. Keep in mind, it's only, 8:51 when she arrives at C.F. McCarthy's, and they leave the waterfall at around midnight. So you do the math.
8:58 p.m. is when the defendant receives drink number 1 at C.F. McCarthy's. Vodka soda, tall cylinder glass, lime, and a strong. 9:13 p.m., drink number 2. 9:20 p.m., drink number 3. 9:33 p.m., drink number 4. 9:57 p.m., drink number 5. 10:22 p.m., drink number 6. 10:29 p.m., drink number 7. 7 drinks from 8:58 p.m. through 10:29 p.m. when she receives that last drink at C.F. McCarthy's. A drink that she indicates to Sergeant Mechanic and several others on the next day that she did not take with her from C.F. McCarthy's to the waterfall, which several individuals at the waterfall testify that she produced from her coat when she walked in, and that you can clearly see on the C.F. McCarthy's video her walking out the door with the same tall cylinder glass in her right hand.
Now, I also just want to point out that we don't actually know what was in any of these drinks. Apparently, Karen drinks, vodka or sodas and then pours shots of vodka in, something to that effect. But these could have also been chasers. She could have been drinking water at some point. So while the point is clear, she was drinking too much, I don't think anyone's arguing she wasn't. We honestly just don't know if these 8 drinks were actual alcoholic beverages.
Now, understanding that some of these drinks are not the full tall cylinder drinks, what she's doing is she's getting shot glasses of vodka and then pouring them into the drink after she's consumed the drink.
And you'll notice here in the background, this is John O'Keefe's mother. And she was pretty prominent, typically at trial, I think almost daily, but I'd have to double check on that.
10:54 p.m. The defendant and Mr. O'Keefe arrive at the waterfall, during the course of which, about an hour that they're there, the defendant receives drinks number 8 and drinks number 9. 12:10 a.m. From the waterfall video, you have Ms. McCabe, Ms. Kolokithis, and the defendant departing the waterfall together.
Okay, so I skipped a bunch there because I want to stick with the timeline, and we're going to come back to video clips, what happened between C.F. McCarthy's and the waterfall, so you can see that for yourself. But here, you're going to get a sense for what the Commonwealth is arguing actually happened around the time of the crime and after. And this is super, super important to pay attention to. So listen very carefully.
12:19:32. Mr. O'Keefe enters 34 Fairview Road into his Waze app on his phone. 12:23 a.m. is when the defendant conducts a 3-point turn on Cedar Crest and travels back toward Fairview. That's from Mr. O'Keefe's GPS native location data from his phone. Around the same time at 12:23 and 12:24 is when you have that testimony from Ryan Nagel, Heather Maxon, and Ricky D'Antonio pulling into Fairview Road around the same time and pulling in behind the dark SUV. 12:25 a.m. is the last native location GPS data of John O'Keefe's phone. It's in that area between 32 and 34 Fairview Road, where his body is discovered the next morning, in which there is no movement of that phone from that 12:25 a.m. period until Miss Roberts then picks up the phone on the grass underneath Mr. O'Keefe's body sometime after 6 a.m. From Trooper Paul's testimony, as far as the mileage, 36 to 38 miles, matching up with the time that the vehicle is in front of 34 Fairview Road, that the vehicle travels in reverse, in a straight line, for 24.2 miles per hour for 62 and a half feet, with a minor steering angle change, which the trooper indicated was consistent with a pedestrian collision.
All right, let's listen to that again. And I want you to pay attention to Trooper Paul. Trooper Paul. Trooper Paul.
So you're saying the discipline of physics cannot figure out how far John O'Keefe's body would move.
So like I said before, the side swipe, he would not have gotten 100% of the vehicle, 100% of the speed of the striking vehicle. It would have vastly underestimated this vehicle. You couldn't hit a person and side swipe them, spin them off to the side, and have that and get a speed from those calculations.
He is the police officer who was in charge of accident reconstruction. So he's the one who's theorizing what actually happened here, that Karen backed into him with her SUV, launched him 30 feet into the air, and in so doing, broke the taillight, and the taillight somehow managed to scratch John O'Keefe's arm before throwing him 30 feet all the way to the flagpole. Let's just listen to that really quick, just before 12:30.
That the vehicle travels in reverse, in a straight line, for 24.2 miles per hour for 62 and a half feet, with a minor steering angle change, which the trooper indicated was consistent with a pedestrian collision.
The car data has Karen backing up at 24.2 miles per hour for 62 and a half feet and making a minor steering shift at that time. Now, Trooper Paul is the one who is saying that by itself is an indication of having hit John. And remember, the Commonwealth, and you'll hear it now, they are arguing that she did this entirely on purpose. So in a fit of anger, stepped on the gas in reverse and slammed into John. And in so doing, sending him flying, hit him directly in the arm to cause the tail light to shatter, and then fly him 30 feet in the air. And also, by the way, not a single bruise was found on the body of John O'Keefe. He was hit by a 7,000-pound vehicle and flung in the air, but no bruise was found.
At 12:30 a.m., you have that second triggering event 8 minutes after the three-point turn when the vehicle is in reverse at 24.2 miles an hour. 12:35 is when the defendant calls John, and that's unanswered. 12:36 is around the time that the defendant's phone connects to the Wi-Fi at 1 Meadows Ave, Mr. O'Keefe's home. 12:37 is when the defendant leaves this voicemail. So within minutes of that vehicle's data, going 24.2 miles an hour in reverse for 62 and a half feet, the defendant leaves that voicemail, seething in rage as she's screaming, "John, I fucking hate you."
And here For those of you that don't know, this is Paul O'Keefe, John's brother. Now, as we're going through this next little sequence here, a little timeline, I want you to put yourself in Karen's shoes. Okay, so you imagine that what they're claiming is she intentionally ran him over, within 3 minutes, called him. 3 minutes after that, called him again, and then left this message screaming, "John, I fucking hate you." Okay, after she just killed him, mind you, on purpose. Makes sense? Okay.
12:55. The defendant texts John, "See you later." 12:59. The defendant calls, leaves another voicemail for Mr. O'Keefe. Exhibit 637. It sounded like this.
"John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows what the fuck you are, you fucking pervert."
Okay, so based on that message, she calls him a fucking pervert. We can go ahead and assume that she assesses the situation, that she believes that he is with another woman, that he's partying, he's at the Albert home, God only knows who's there, and that he's drinking, having a grand old time while she's back at his house taking care of or watching, babysitting his children as they sleep, right? But according to Adam Lawley, these messages are evidence of her anger after she already killed him. So you tell me, after you just killed somebody, would you call them, and we're about to learn, 53 times? She reaches out to him 53 times from 12:30 at night till the time she winds up going to look for him. 53 times.
But somebody did know where Mr. O'Keefe was. The defendant knew exactly where he was. She had driven him there. She had struck him there. She had left him to die there. 1:02 a.m., the defendant leaves another voicemail with no content. And then she texts John, "Your kids are fucking alone." 1:09 a.m., the defendant texts John, "I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone." She's not. GPS, as far as it never disconnects from the Wi-Fi until the following morning.
Well, let's look at that. So at 1:08 or 1:09, and 1:09, she indicates to John that she's leaving the house, and then says, "I'm back in Mansfield." Like, I'm at my house in Mansfield, right? So calling and threatening to leave the kids alone, but then won't leave them. Doesn't go home. If this was a cold-blooded murderer, do you think she'd be worried about leaving this kid alone? Does this make sense to you? This is a cold-blooded murderer who just backed into her boyfriend on purpose, right? Then has the presence of mind to try to get in touch with him, leave these messages, scream and yell. I mean, you get the sense that these are authentically emotional. Like, this isn't a contrived scream and yell. And if you're someone especially who likes true crime, everyone's always trying to analyze the 911 calls to see if it's real emotion or not. You tell me, does this sound like real emotion to you? Because it sounds like real emotion to me. And it also tracks, remember, with our anxious attachment style. This woman is trying to get his attention. And while we might expect this kind of behavior from somebody who's drunk and has an anxious attachment, we wouldn't see this kind of behavior from somebody who just killed the person that they are calling and texting.
There's no indication that Ms. Reed left and went to her home in Mansfield at any point. 1:10 a.m., the defendant calls her parents. 1:11 a.m., she calls Mr. O'Keefe and leaves this voicemail.
"John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit Amy. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. Keep sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself."
I like that one because you can kind of hear her accent at the tail end there. Okay. Again, you're fucking another girl. So here we have evidence that Karen absolutely believes John is with a woman, and not unlike or uncharacteristic of all the rest of the messages that we've seen from her in the last 24 hours to John specifically.
1:18 a.m., the defendant leaves another voicemail. 4:42 a.m., the defendant calls and speaks. So the calls to her parents are finally answered.
Importantly, you see there's this gap in time between just before 2 a.m. and 4:42 when she calls her parents. We see that there's this period of time, a little under, maybe like 2 hours, a little over 2 hours, where we can probably assume Karen's asleep, right? That she passed out. Makes sense given all the alcohol she's consumed. So between 2 and 4:30 a.m., it appears that she passed out. And I also just want to point out that Karen calls her parents all the time. Apparently, she's very close to them. And because of that anxious attachment style, as I already mentioned, that makes sense that she would be in constant communication with them, because what do our parents give us? They give us reassurance. It's going to be okay. Don't worry. It's going to be okay, honey, right?
4:49 a.m., calls Miss Camerano screaming, "Where's Mike?" 4:53 in the morning is when the defendant instructs Kaylee, Mr. O'Keefe's niece, to call Miss McCabe. Why? Because the defendant doesn't have Miss McCabe's phone number. Indicates that John didn't come home. We got in a fight, and I left him at the waterfall. Those are the first statements, or the first version of events that she's able to communicate out to the world as to what happened to Mr. O'Keefe and where he is.
So I want you to imagine that you've now drank, I don't know, 10 shots. We'll just estimate 8 to 12 shots of vodka. Okay. You've been drinking up until, let's say, 1:30 in the morning. You pass out at 2:15, something like that. And then you wake up 2.5 hours later. How do you think you might feel? Might you be a little out of it? Might you be a little groggy? Might you not have 100% clear recollection of the events that transpired only a few hours earlier? And of course, Adam Lawley is trying to, imply that she's lying, that she's intentionally misleading to try to say she was never at the house. That's one way to reason it. The other, that makes more sense given all the rest of her actions, the 53 calls and texts she's placed to John before that. What makes sense is that she doesn't freaking remember, because they are asserting, the Commonwealth is saying, this woman just had 12 drinks, which, by the way, I would be dead if I drank 12 shots of vodka in 3 hours. I would be dead. I'm just telling you, I'd be dead.
We got into a fight. I left him at the waterfall. 5 a.m., the defendant calls Kerry Roberts, saying, "John's dead, Kerry, hangs up the phone.
Now, why would she say John's dead? Well, the reason, we find out later, is it's clear that this type of behavior, staying out all night, is absolutely uncharacteristic of John O'Keefe. This is never something he's done before. So she's absolutely panicked, because now she no longer is worried that he's with another woman, but now is starting to worry that he's gone. Something has happened, because in her mind, there's no other explanation that makes sense. He must have gotten, injured. Now, he wasn't driving. Remember, she dropped him off. So in her mind, he's on foot. Maybe he walked home, or maybe he tried to walk somewhere and got hit by a car. Right? Remember, it was a snowstorm, and now at this time, the snow is starting to pick up. Through the night and into the early morning is when the snow actually picks up some
5:01,
steam.
the defendant calls Kerry Roberts again. And it's at this point that she indicates that John's dead, he must have been hit by a cloud. 5:07 a.m., the defendant leaves One Meadows Ave. You have the video of that. It's number 153 in Exhibit 6. We'll get to that a little more in a moment. About 5:10 a.m., the defendant calls Carrie Roberts. Ms. Roberts starts calling hospitals, calling KCD, calling 911, something that you would do if you didn't know where Mr. O'Keefe was for all of these hours, that all of these other phone calls are being made and these text messages are being sent and calling your parents and all of these other things. No calls to 911 from the defendant.
Now, that's a good point. Why not call 911? Well, because if you have an anxious attachment style and are obsessed with the idea that your boyfriend has another relationship or is pulling away, you sense he's pulling away from you, you start thinking he wants to go out, he's probably out partying with other women, you're not thinking, oh my God, I better call 911 because he's not here. You're very clearly worried he's cheating on you, not that he was hit by a car or by a plow. Not until you realize, you sober up maybe a little too, and realize he's not come home at all. Like, that is terrifying because remember, it's not just Karen at home waiting for him, it's his kids, right? His niece and nephew, or his niece at least, is home at the house, right? Because she can't leave them there alone.
5:11 a.m., the defendant's vehicle is seen on the Canton Library camera heading towards the waterfall. Seems to be sort of retracing steps. 5:18 a.m., the defendant's vehicle is seen at Washington Street and Chapman on the Temple Beth Abraham video, heading in the same direction that it was the night before when it was heading to 34 Fairview Road.
Adam Lawley is trying to make the argument here that there's some kind of nefarious behavior on the part of Karen Reed, that while she says that she was driving around looking for him, retracing their steps, she actually saw him dead on the lawn at the Fairview house. By the way, there's no evidence of any of this. And then went home to John's house and pretended like she did not know that he was there when Carrie Roberts and Jen McCabe take her then looking for John. And she is able to spot the body on the lawn, that she had already known it was there. And that's why she was able to spot his body so quickly, not because she's frantic, out of her mind. And oh, by the way, when you're in that kind of fight or flight, even your vision changes, your senses become heightened so that you can assess threats accurately. So if you think that your boyfriend or partner is dead and are driving around in a snowstorm looking for him, you would very likely be in an active state or fight or flight, which we will observe that she is very much in, or at least we'll be able to hear it in just a bit. And so it makes sense that she'd be able to spot him on the lawn. But rather than think of it this way, of course, we have Karen driving around for 10 minutes on her own, spotting him, going back to John's house, and then making up a story that she didn't know where he was. And oh, by the way, why would she need to do that if she already knew where he was?
When the defendant, no one else, spots Mr. O'Keefe's body buried in the snow.
6:03 now is when Carrie Roberts pulls up in the SUV, sees John, where they spot him on the front lawn, and where Jen McCabe then calls 911. And you're going to see for yourself whether he was indeed buried or not. But make no mistake, those were very intentional words by Mr. Lawley, intentionally quite
Exhibit
deceiving.
12, indicating this cruiser camera video, which I know you've seen a dozen times. So where I'm starting it from this point in this card right here is the spotlight that Officer Saraf had to use in order
you'll
to
notice
locate,
there's about an
even with the
inch
vehicle
of snow on the
Ms.
ground
Roberts,
here.
parked right in the middle of the road.
And there it is. So there is that video, which is very quick, so it's hard to see. Well, we're going to look at a much longer video to help you there in a minute. Now I want you to take a closer look at some of the video from the waterfall. Now, the waterfall is where they were in the 11 o'clock hour before Karen pulls up with John in front of the 34 Fairview home, where Brian Albert, police officer Brian Albert's home, where he lives with his wife, Nicole Albert, and their family. And remember, this is the Albert family home. This is where Brian Albert has grown up. So now I want to take a look at a little bit of video from the actual 11 o'clock hour, so you can get a sense for kind of what was going on, what was the vibe, and how did they end up at the Alberts' home. I got this video from Microdots. Definitely check them out. You can check them out on YouTube where their videos are. They have done an amazing job at trying to recreate pieces of the night in question. But these are purely just the videos from the waterfall. So here you'll see who the players are that are involved in this case. This is this guy right here. That is Brian Higgins. He is the ATF agent who was stationed out of Canton, Massachusetts, apparently because he's friendly with the police chief, which we learned from Brian Higgins while he's on the stand. And we also learn from Brian Higgins' testimony on the stand that he and Karen were having a text message relationship in the 2 to 3 weeks just before this incident. So we know that leading up to this night, they had exchanged a kiss just a week or so before during the Super Bowl. Actually, at the house, at John's home, Karen walked him outside and then they had a little kiss goodbye. So she was flirting with Brian. So he actually is a big part of the defense's case, who argue that Higgins actually had a motive. And that's why you'll see in a moment in this video, there's a little bit of attention drawn to the exchange that Brian Higgins and John O'Keefe actually have. Now, before we get to that, over here on the left in this striped jacket, that is Brian Albert, the homeowner at 34 Fairview. And this guy over here, this is Chris Albert. Now, Chris is important because not only is he Brian Albert's brother, he is the guy that owns the pizza shop in town. He's the person that was friendlier with John, and he's the one that invited John out, let him know they were going to be at the waterfall, and invited him to come over. They were texting. John O'Keefe was asking who's over there, who's all there before they decided to walk over. So as far as anybody knows, John O'Keefe did not have knowledge of Karen and Brian Higgins and their text interactions. Now, on the right side here is John O'Keefe. This is Karen Reed. And Karen is talking to Jen McCabe. And you'll be able to see that more clearly in just a moment. Everyone's having a fun time. Everyone's happy. Everyone seems to be pretty wasted. We also learned later that these two, Brian Higgins and Brian Albert, had been on their way back from New York City, where they were for a few days. A big group of them, some had flown down, others had drove down, and they were there to pay their respects to a fallen, maybe there was two fallen New York City cops that they were allegedly there to pay their respects to. So we know that they were coming back, and Brian Albert was supposed to fly back, but decided to drive back with Brian Higgins because of the snowstorm. So he did not fly back. He decided to drive back, and they had driven up from New York to Boston, back to Canton earlier in the day, and stopped, had drinks, then got something to eat, drank some more. So these two had been drinking presumably all day. And that's also important to know, right? I think on the stand, Brian Higgins admits to having like 12 whiskeys. And certainly if he admits to 12, it means he's probably had a lot more. And, not a small guy, so we factor that in, certainly. It also seems like these people drink quite a bit, so it's not as though I'm having 12 whiskeys, in which case I would certainly be dead. Now here, we have a split screen, and I want you to pay close attention to what's happening here. So in the lower left, thanks to microdots, we have an image of Brian Higgins. Right here, it looks like he's got some kind of like Harley shirt on. I don't think it's a Harley shirt, but it looks like it, a sweatshirt. And in a moment, you're going to see in the big screen what is John O'Keefe and Karen Reed, and what looks to be Brian Higgins motioning for John to come with him. And we know that they are going to Brian Albert's home for an after party because Brian Albert's son, who was like 20-something, Brian Albert Jr., was having a birthday party. Not a big party, but just, whatever, 5, 6, 7 friends over. So that's why they decided to go back to the Albert home. It should also be noted that it came out later that Karen wanted to not go to the Albert house. She wanted to go across the street to Chris Albert's pizza shop so they could play and make pizzas. And I guess she was annoying about that. She kept bringing that up throughout the night. Nobody else, I guess, they just kept ignoring her. And she did not want to go to the Albert home. She said that her stomach hurt, and we know that Karen had stomach issues. But she also makes a point to say, like, she didn't think she was invited. And Brian Albert's not the warmest, friendliest guy. They were not friends. They were acquaintances. Obviously, John and Karen were friendly with his brother, but were not friends with him. And so you could see, Karen didn't want to go. She was very reluctant to go to the house. She didn't feel they were invited. But here's Brian Higgins prompting John to come, and you'll see this very clearly. So there's Brian on the bottom, pointing and motioning for John to come. And then you see John saying something back, laughing, smiling, takes a drink of his beer, does a little dance. It's very cute. And we see, John says, then he motions, look, me and you, me and you. And let's play that again. I'll go back just so you can see that whole little exchange again. Here it is. It's very quick. Again, now we have Brian Higgins motioning to John. Here it is. Come on, let's go. We're leaving. You're coming. And we see John say something kind of smart ass back. He's laughing. He's smiling, checking to see if anybody else heard him make the smart ass comment, right? Does his little dance, feeling good, obviously. And then says, yeah, all right, me and you, me and you. Tragic. And then we see everybody go ahead and leave. There's Chris Albert grabbing the arm of Brian Higgins in this front with the striped jacket. That's Brian Albert. Okay, so, and we see these are not small men, right? These are big boys. Just pointing that out. There's the exchange again. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the conditions. This is from the first responding police officer, Officer Seraph. This is from his camera pulling up to the house. And so here we have the first officer arrive. We have Carrie Roberts, her vehicle open. We have what looks to be Karen Reed, Jennifer McCabe. We have these folks just running around. We have the first responders showing up, the ambulance, the paramedics, and then other police officers start to show up. Thanks to Microdots for doing a bang-up job on putting all this video together and cleaning it up as well. And there goes John in the ambulance. So you see this flagpole here, okay? Notice the flagpole here. Notice the garage here, okay? Okay. Now I want to take a look at the house and what this house actually looks like. What does it actually look like to be in front of the house at 34 Fairview Ave in Canton? What does it look like, right? Because we can see it in the dark and we see with the snow, and it's, you know, it's really hard to kind of get a true sense for what we're talking about. So we're going to take a look now at what this house looks like in the middle of the day. This is what 34 Fairview looks like. Now I'm going to stop it here. Here's the flagpole, right? So we know this is the flagpole that we saw in that other video. Here's the garage. And approximately John's body was right here. Now, also might be useful to keep in mind, the defense is saying the incident inside the house, once John is murdered by somebody inside of the house, they drag his body out from this side door over here, and that Brian Albert's Ford Edge is parked here in the middle of the road to block the view. So that's an argument you are going to hear from the defense in just a little bit. But you might also notice two really important details about this house. And for me, when I'm thinking about this case and integrity and who do I believe and what's true and what's not true, there is one detail that stands out above all the others. And that is where we are going to start our next show. That is it for me today. I thank you so much for being here with me. I'm super excited to dive into this stuff with you guys. I want to hear from you. Please check the show notes to give us a call. I look forward to it. I cannot wait to do it. And I can't wait to unpack all of this with you. So give us a call. And I thank you for your time, for your effort, for your attention. Be safe, and we'll see you again soon.